So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. So, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about refiring pottery and like what it is and why a potter would ever want to do that. And I'll tell you also about like my experiences with refiring pottery. Okay, so refiring pottery is essentially when a pot has already been like fired in a glaze firing, and then it's effectively you're just taking that pot and refiring it in a glaze firing. So it could be earthenware or it could be stoneware, but you're essentially just refiring it again. You're doing the final part of the pottery process and just doing it again. So why on earth would a potter want to do that? Well, okay, so it could be if the pot wasn't fired up to the right temperature in the first place. So, for example, in certain types of kilns, maybe like a wood kiln, maybe certain parts of the kiln didn't get hot enough to mature that glaze, and so you want to refire that pot to get it up to its glaze maturity temperature the next time. Or it could be, for example, in like an electric kiln, sometimes maybe there's a power cut or something, and the kiln cuts out in terms of it doesn't get to the right temperature, and so those pots never get up to their glaze maturation temperature. For example, I had a situation where my kiln actually cut out because the room got too hot and then it switched off, and then all of those pots inside were underfired. So it could be you want to refire a pot up to its proper glaze firing temperature. Okay, so another reason that a potter might want to refire a pot is that they just basically don't like the way it looks. Okay, so this could be if, say, like the glaze, they want to maybe try a new glaze on top of the original glaze, or maybe they want to add some coloring oxides. Um, it's generally better to try and apply like the right glaze and maybe a coloring oxide at the stage where it's like the bisque fired stage, and then just fire it once. But instead of losing all those pots, if you get them all out the kiln and you really hate them all, and they're you think like, I think I could make them so much nicer if I just like applied a different glaze or something. It's better to kind of try a refiring than maybe to waste a whole kiln's worth of pots where you're just like, oh no, this is just not working or something. So that's another reason a potter might do that, might refire. They want to maybe apply another glaze and refire their pot. So yeah, I want to read something out to you actually from the book called A Potter's Book by Bernard Leach. So Bernard Leach is considered like one of the founders of studio pottery in the UK. So really kind of well-known potter. And a Potter's Book was written by Bernard Leach in 1940, and then it's had like loads of different editions written. This one I got out of the library actually, and it's from 1976. And what's really interesting about a potter's book is that it's not only is it kind of like the first half of the book is kind of all about like the different techniques like Bernard Leach used, and kind of it's almost like a training manual for like pottery, but like the end of the book is a series of like diary entries and also like letters written to different potters about kind of like different techniques, and they're sort of chatting about different things that worked and different things that didn't work. And the thing I want to read you out is about Bernard Leach kind of discovering some pots which are um, underfired. Also, like they didn't like the way they looked, and kind of talking about kind of reglazing them basically and refiring. So let me read this bit out to you. So this is from page 246, and Bernard Leach writes. There are generally a few underfired pots left over from previous kilns which require a touch or two of thick glaze where the original coat has chipped or bubbled off. Sometimes bubbles have to be ground down to a smooth surface with carborundum, and in other cases, it is possible to save a good shape by re-dipping it in an opaque glaze to cover the original colour or pattern. Such pots may have to be preheated as they are practically non absorbent. And in any case, the consistency of the glaze must be thick. That is why it is better to do this work before the glazes are thinned out with water for normal dipping. Um, it is also possible to make a thick glaze adhere by brushing the pot over with a thin coat of size and letting the surface dry before redipping. So yeah, that's really interesting. So that's basically Bernard Leach saying that some of the pots that came out the original glaze firing kiln had bubbles on, or like the glaze had chipped off. And the technique that Bernard Leach is using is basically to sand down those bubbles and then redip the pot in a thick glaze and then refire. So yeah, so as you can see, like some potters do use refiring for sort of like to change the way a pot looks. Maybe the surface isn't right, maybe they don't like the way it looks, and then they can kind of, it gives them another opportunity basically to sort of fix that pot. So let me tell you about the the two experiences I've had with refiring. So refiring isn't something I really do that much in my pottery because well, it has mixed results, as I'm about to tell you. In fact, 100% of the time I've done it, I've been kind of like unsuccessful in creating like a nicer pottery. And also I'm really aware of like the energy it takes, to do a kiln firing. So I mean, what I would say is it's probably, from a kind of environmental perspective, it could be a kind of positive thing to do if you have like a whole kiln of pots that are like, you just don't like them, or like the surface hasn't been right, or the glaze hasn't matured or something. It could be worth redipping those and then reglazing, because you would lose that whole kiln of pots, otherwise, if you can't sort of, if you're trying to like say like, I don't know, sell them and you can't, or it's all that material, all those raw materials have gone into those pots. So it might be worth like refiring them, like reglazing, refiring. But generally speaking, like I haven't really had that experience where like a whole kiln of pottery I haven't really liked, but I have tried to refire a particular type of pot, which I sort of thought, oh, I think it could be a bit nicer, like the way it looks and stuff. And also, I kind of enjoy like experimenting, always like following curiosity and stuff. I'm like, oh, I wonder if like I could refire that and it could be nicer. So okay, so the first thing to tell you about is this kind of, I sort of made these like bud vases. I'm just holding up like a little vase which is fired with a wood ash glaze, um, and the glaze is kind of clear. And I thought, "Do you know what? Maybe it could be nicer if I put some homemade copper oxide on the rim of the pot and then refired." So, so this had unanticipated consequences. So, I did actually. It did actually kind of look nicer, on with the kind of the green around the rim of the vase. But what actually happened on the inside is that all of the inside of the pot started to kind of bubble and melt, and basically, yeah, the whole inside of the pot started to kind of like disintegrate. So that was not really a successful refiring, because of basically, the pot just basically started kind of melting melting in the kiln. So yeah, I would say that's a refiring fail, even though potentially it did look a bit nicer on the rim. That is kind of essentially not really kind of usable now. So yeah, another thing that I tried is refiring. So like I was saying to you at the beginning of the episode, I had a situation where my kiln switched off when it was kind of on the way up to heating to the right temperature. And what happened was when and that was because it was like a safety mechanism. The room got too hot, it switched the kiln off, and then when I opened the kiln, all of the pots inside had this kind of like rough surface, and that's because the glaze, it was a wood ash glaze, and it just hadn't melted properly. And so, yeah, the normal kind of shiny pots that I was expecting like weren't there, and then they're all rough basically. So what I did was I set it to refire like back up to the same way temperature, and what I found was those pots were still rough on even on the second glaze firing. So I think, I mean, in retrospect, that probably may perhaps I should have maybe re-dipped them. I don't know, but I just assumed the glaze would just, mature again if it was just fired up to the right temperature. But yeah, for some reason it didn't. And then yeah, I think if I'd redipped the pots, maybe that would have helped. But yeah, so those are the two times I've refired, and neither has been successful at all. Um, but yeah, like we just heard in the A Potter's Book by Bernard Leach. If the glaze is applied thickly and the pot is maybe heated a bit, those two things can really help a glaze adhere to an already glazed pot, because that glaze really isn't going to like sink in very well, because it's like that pot is like vitrified, and also it's probably got a kind of glazed surface to try and stick onto, which is like really difficult. But yeah, heating the pot, putting the glaze on thickly, and then just refiring and seeing what happens. So yeah, it's always an option. If you think your pot is like, you really don't like it, very sort of disappointed in the way it looks and stuff, and you want to try reapplying a glaze and refiring, that is definitely something you can try. Rather than lose that pot completely. Like Bernard Leach talks about how, the shape of a pot is really beautiful, and you don't want to kind of like lose that beautiful shape of a pot just because like the glaze surface isn't quite right, or it's got a few bubbles or something, which you can glaze over again or something. Yeah, so that's been all about refiring pottery. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed like this episode, and really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. And until then, wishing you very, very happy potting, and I'll see you then. Okay, bye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery, or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.